have our first panel now joining the stage that John Dewar will facilitate, and I'll let, he perhaps needs no introduction in a place like this, but I'll let him introduce the rest of the panel. So please come and join us on stage, the panel. And please make them welcome as they do so. If you could sit underneath your photograph, that would be great. They're going to sit very carefully underneath their own photographs so that you know who they are and that they're in the right order, and we'll all be very comfortable. Perfect, Pascale. So I'll leave you in the very capable hands of John Dewar to introduce the panel and the discussion we'll make in response to that fireside chat. John, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, and congratulations, Martin, on putting together such a great event today. And I think the fact that there is a long waiting list for tickets is evidence of how you've really hit the mark with this program. Look, the purpose of this session is to look at the question of AI in higher education and its impact through the lens of individual institutions. So we've had a great overview from Paul about what this means for work and where universities might sit in that new environment. But how does it look from the point of view of the leader of a university in particular? So we've got 4 fantastic university leaders to help us debate that topic. But I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks. And I may have had some help from ChatGPT in drafting these. But welcome to the age where our students are using AI to write their essays, and we're using AI to mark them. I suppose that's called efficiency, or perhaps a kind of poetic irony. But we're here today to discuss the simple question of how AI will impact Australian tertiary education. But behind that question lies an important inflection point, as we've heard, a moment where our choices as university leaders will determine whether we harness AI to evolve or whether we're disrupted by it. Is this the university Kodak moment? Much of the discussion about AI and higher education so far, and I think this is why this is such an important topic for this discussion, has been a bit reactive. ChatGPT appeared as a rather unwelcome guest, suddenly rewriting assignments and challenging everything from assessment design to our confidence in academic integrity. But this isn't just about cheating. This is about change, deep and structural and transformative change. We know that AI is already transforming industries, and if we believe it'll reshape how we teach and how we research, how we assess, how we prepare graduates, then the only real question for universities is whether we're moving quickly enough. Now, in that context, the latest Cisco AI Readiness Index shows that just 4% of Australian businesses are pace setters in AI compared to a global benchmark of 13%. So Australia has a long history of being an early adopter of technology, but in the case of AI, it starts to look as though we're laggards. So what are the implications of that for universities, for our workforce, and indeed for our entire education system? Now, we've talked for a long time about the disruption of higher education by technology. That conversation has been going on for decades. It doesn't feel as though it's happened yet, but AI may be the thing that actually forces us to do it. So today's conversation will, I think, or I hope, not just in this session, but throughout the rest of the day, force us to ask, well, what happens now, what's possible, and what are we going to do differently in the short, medium, and longer terms. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists today just to talk a little bit about how they are thinking about AI as part of their future strategies for their institutions. I know that certainly in the case of Pascale and Andrew, that you're both going through a process of strategic renewal, and it'll be really interesting to hear how you're factoring in AI into that process. Jess is about to move jobs. She was my colleague at Day 3, she has already moved jobs. Was my colleague at La Trobe, now DVC academic at Deakin. Of course, an institution that has a long history of digital disruption and really using technology to its greatest advantage. So after 3 days, Jess, very interested to hear your take. And I'm really delighted to have Dan Cockerell with us. Dan is possibly someone that many of you haven't met yet. He's still the relatively new CEO of Torrens University, but an institution that has really built a strong reputation for getting close to employers, and it'll be really interesting to hear your take, Dan, on how you're seeing the future and where AI fits into how we prepare students in particular. So, Pascale, let me start with you. Your strategic plan famously has these moonshots, and I know that you're going through a process of rethinking that plan. You may or may not be able to tell us much about that today, but how are you seeing AI as part of your next wave of strategic thinking?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think it's, as a preamble, I would say that I was fortunate enough when I arrived in Melbourne that we were in the midst of the pandemic. And I say fortunate because I didn't need to make the case for change, and I didn't need to make the case for the fact that technology was not tearing society apart, it was bringing people together. So it did really enable us to have a foundation vision of people and technology working together for a better world, which I think is kind of really important because it's kind of debunked the model that technology was somehow anti-people. But that red thread of having to work so that technology and people can connect and then deliver a better outcome is one that we're carrying through our next strategic plan, which, as you said, John, we're working on. And the way that I can describe it is, because we've landed our moonshots, we're very keen to slingshot and go further. But the second thing is that we keep true to that notion of people and technology must work together. Technology of its own is not an end, it's a means to an end. And unless people adopt it, adapt it, and use it, it creates no value. So we continue with that very strong vision, which I think has been endorsed. But where we've been able to illustrate what we believe is the future is that rather than have a conversation online with all the staff, as I did in 2020, we opened the conversation with alumni, with students, with staff, with industry partners, with TNA partners. And the main reason why we could do that and have such a broad conversation is because, unlike the last time when I read every single piece of feedback that I received from staff, we actually got AI through. And AI assisted us in identifying the emerging themes. And those emerging themes were then reflected in a series of sessions. And then we got people to kind of validate or vote or dispute the type of emerging themes. And we're now down to the process of distilling this in something that will not be called a moonshot, but will but will be equally metaphoric and important because people do like to have these big transversal objectives. So I can tell you, spoiler alert, it's not going to be, again, a strategy where we talk about education and research and engagement or whatever. We want transversal, big objectives. Just like moonshots, we want something that will coalesce people and give people a positive, optimistic thing that as one institution, as one Swinburne, we can pursue. So not all is yet finalized, but there will be 4 such strong, so not moonshot, but something else. And we are in the process of validating because AI can provide the emerging themes, but should not necessarily be trusted to be entirely truthful in reflecting the way people think. And in the next couple of months, we'll go through the process of validating this and announcing it to the world.
So what can you tell us about how, obviously you used AI to help you develop the strategy, but what can you tell us about how AI will fit into the strategy itself?
So I think that one of the things that people have recognized, whether it's internal or external, is the fact that we have to, as a university, adapt, adopt, and model the use of technology. So we've got to be brave enough to try things and actually be willing to share with others those things where it hasn't worked. And I think this is one of the characters of Swinburne, that we're quite entrepreneurial. And as of 2 years ago, I think I was the VC that invented the Failing Forward Award, where I encourage people to actually put their hand up and say when they tried something and it didn't work. We've also, as of the last EA, introduced 10% of people's time is dedicated to innovation. But I think the emerging theme that we are reading so far is that we have to infuse AI and technology in everything we do, in our teaching, in our research, in our engagement, in our student support, in our administration. We should really be thinking about the benefit that AI can provide to deliver more personalized and more rapid response. And that will resonate with the researchers too, because Paul talked about it just now. But I think what's unusual about the technological revolution that we are entering is that AI is not just experiencing that revolution in and of itself. It is accelerating the innovation that occur in other fields. So there's a kind of technology super cycle that's coming up. And so you have to really master AI, not just to be better at it, but because it will assist your research, your teaching, and everything else you do in other ways.
Thanks, Pascale. Andrew, the concepts of core and adjacencies have been key to your philosophy as a leader of UTS. Now that you're coming into your second term and rethinking your strategic direction, how are you seeing the needs and opportunities of AI to develop and deliver on your current core and develop new adjacencies?
So I'll come to that perhaps through the lens of the strategy evolution similar to Pascale's. We, back in 2017, 2018, we did a very large technology-led crowdsourced approach to engaging our community. And we framed the strategy in the sense of it being a series of guideposts that allow you to make choices and to make investments and so forth. So if you look at strategy with that lens, that it gives you it's not a marketing campaign, it's what are we going to actually do. And we called that strategy UTS 2027. We've just finished another strategy exercise, and we're calling this one UTS 2030. Now, if you do the sums, we're not at 2027 yet. And I think that's a signal of two things, really, and that is that when the environment changes, whether it's the impact of technology disruption, policy, the environment, it's time to check in to see whether the guideposts are right and the investment choices that you make are right, and that you are actually taking account of the things that you need to take account of. So we settled on 4 areas, which will come to the core and the adjacency piece, and a bit also like Pascale. Our carve up of those is not teaching, research, engagement, support. We talk about a university that's creative and innovative. What does that mean in the context of digital disruption and the industries that supports, and how creativity and innovation could infuse what we talk about a connected and engaged university in terms of the way in which we work with the professions in particular. And that's particularly pertinent at the moment. I think last week sometime, Kylie Reedman, my Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Education, and students convened a panel as part of the ATN's forum, which talked to the professions. And they have such an input. 60%, maybe 2/3 of our courses are professionally accredited. So somehow we have to sort of co-create the future with the custodians of the professions that we're in. And I like the example that was given earlier about how the medical profession is changing. I mean, I'm not a medical practitioner, but I'm a user of the medical profession. And while I'm not exactly sure that I want an iPhone to tell me what's happening, it is true that a lot of medical stuff is pattern recognition, right? Work out what the symptoms are, look at the experiment that's going on, diagnose, provide a treatment. And so there's a technology disruption there for doctors, and the solution there is to put it to nurses. But what if we could work with the medical profession to transform the way in which doctors actually spend their time with patients, and what that would do to the capacity we have if we change the way we educated doctors in that environment. And it's true of other professions. We do it all the time with law and so forth, and ones that are highly regulated. So being engaged and connected is absolutely critical to adapting to the technology. The student-centred university, I think, is fairly evident, but John, you mentioned at the beginning the reactive nature of some of the things that we've been doing, right? The apparent assault on academic integrity, but also a recognition that the very environment that our students are going into is one that has these technologies available. So what does that mean about what we assess, how we assure the learning and all of those sorts of things, and make it supportive of the student rather than policing what the student does. It's very different. We've got leaders in that area that work through that. And the last one is the university gets things done, and that's where technology helps us get things done. So that's the sort of framing for the core and adjacencies. And I used the term core and adjacencies a few years ago, which was really associated with the business model of the university, not necessarily what the university does. So if you think about, for UTS, we are fundamentally, particularly at undergraduate level, a campus-based university. All right? Almost all of what we do is on the campus. It's an experience on the campus. It's certainly digitally enriched. But our operating model is set up to give students a fantastic experience on the campus. And the reputation we built as an institution means that we have international students coming to enjoy that too, at least at the moment. But so to the adjacent part then means if we have to do education differently, whether we have to redefine what we mean by transnational education or expand our digital reach but give the same type of experience, the model that we use to do it has to change as well. And that comes to how we use some of the digital technologies and the opportunities that are afforded in a range of different ways through AI and others to not so much replicate the experience that we have on campus, but to give the same dimensions of a richness of what it means to study. So the core and the adjacencies cut through all four of those pillars I spoke about. And the other final thing I'll just say, because we have time to hear others, is there's big S strategy and there's small S strategy. We have to remember, universities created AI. This isn't something that technology companies brought out. Universities decades ago of research created machine learning and so forth. We have a responsibility to continue that journey of how it's being used. So we created an AI statement of intent some years ago. I think we were the first university in Australia, maybe one of the few globally to do that said, we have a role in the creation and pushing the boundaries of new technologies, but we also have a role in its responsible use. We have a role in ensuring that our key stakeholders, including our students, can use it well in their careers and their professions, and we have a responsibility as a public institution to see what AI can do to ensure that we can direct the resources to the things that are important to us. We didn't then take the next step of then, right, so what? So I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Carly, I don't think we actually mention AI explicitly in our strategy. But we've got leaders in the institution, some who are in this room, who basically stepped in, because that's what universities do. They stepped in and populated those four quadrants for us. So we've got people who are leading around what AI means in learning. We've got people thinking about how we can work with industry and the professions in the responsible use of technology. We've got people thinking about how we can actually address the adjacencies by the better use of the right technologies, the human technologies, the human-centred technologies that will enable the experience to be an enriching experience. And while I don't actually think in the sector, because we haven't got the shared services model to get the scale, we'll see the same sort of impact on jobs. I think we'll see jobs shift substantially as we learn how to get the efficiency we can out of AI.
Great, thanks Andrew. You might come back to some of those points. I'd like to go to Dan. Dan, you hold a unique position in this sector. You're at the helm of a large private university, which in itself is a minority position to occupy. But you also came to the sector from North America, from completely outside higher education. You worked for Disney, I think, from memory. So you've been in the job for a year, 18 months now. What impressions have you formed so far of the Australian higher education sector, our embrace of technology and improving the student or customer experience? I'd be really interested to hear your observations on that.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I promise there won't be an American on every panel. We started with Paul and me, and just a quick thing that kind of Paul talked about. The U.S. right now, I think the diagnosis is temporary insanity. So hopefully the cure will be coming through soon. So I apologize for that on behalf of my country. But thank you for having me. So it's been quite an education in the past 14 months since coming to Torrens, and when I look at how we talk about the universities in Australia, and I think worldwide, we talk about research, creating new knowledge, social license. So it's not a business; it is an institution, and it needs to be managed and led differently than a business would be. But there's a certain appropriateness to deal in reality and what our students are looking for, and really look at that. So I think using the word customers is inappropriate, sometimes maybe uncomfortable in the university setting, and I'm very clear never to use the word customers. We always use the word students. But when I do think about the word customers, I think about are our students customers, and I would say they are. And the way I think about this is they're customers because they have a choice and they have certain expectations. And they're going to use the choice that they can be free to make, and expectations to drive value from where they end up going to get their education. Whether that's in a private university, a public university, an online university, or they just use ChatGPT to be their professor. They have that choice. And so when we go back and we look at the power of technology, you go back to maybe 2010, 2011. Well, why did everyone, if they wanted to have a quick, efficient, the most efficient way to get around, get a taxi? Well, because they didn't have a choice. And now they do have a choice because technology's enabled share riding and Uber and Lyft and other organizations. Why do we used to go to the bank to deposit our checks? Because we didn't have a choice, and now we do have a choice. So technology is going to continue to create flexibility and choice for people, and we have to figure out what the value that we're bringing to that experience. So I made a list of the things, because what I like to think about is, and I saw this happen at Disney. Technology came rushing in, and what a lot of organizations will do is take the technology and walk around and just point it at different things and see what sticks. And I think strategy is about what are we trying to do as a business, as a university, and then how does the technology come in? How do we put the resources towards it? And I look at AI as just another tool. It's just another piece of technology that's getting us to an end goal, and it's not the be-all, end-all. And my experiences at Disney, we spent a lot of time when we put new technology in place going and communicating very strongly to the employees that the technology was not the driving success here. It was the foundational pieces of hospitality and taking care of our customers that would make them come back again, help us get a better reputation. So I think about expectations, and I'd ask, these are some questions I ask myself all the time. And the first one is, how well do you know your customers, your students' expectations and their experiences? And we have surveys and we have all kinds of ways to get that, but do you really have a good handle on what each of your student profiles looks like, whether they're domestic or international or 30 years old or a school leaver? What does that path look like? And do you understand their emotional state and how they think about what they want and what they need? We become experts in our industries, and because we're experts, we stop listening to the people who are paying us because we know better than they do, and that's always a mistake. We have to be in tune with what they're looking for. So when I think about this, I think our students, they expect to learn new skills and knowledge, right? That's something they do. So how do you point AI at that to update content faster and be more relevant with student content? There's a direct connection there. It's pretty clear. They expect flexibility. Some of them less flexibility. They're full-time students. They come in and they're 100% students. But I think we're seeing a lot of this today. Our students aren't 100% students. They have other things happening. Even if they're 100% students, they're also working. They have other things going on in their life. So how are we using AI to create flexibility in that? Asynchronous learning, online versus in person, the days of the week, 24-hour support. What are the actual things that 24-hour support should provide, and what should it not have to provide? I like to think about technology sometimes. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And a lot of times we take technology, it can do this. Well, it can do that, but is that really the best way? Should we implement it that way? And having the discipline to not do that. They expect frictionless experiences. Our students are not comparing themselves to other universities. They're comparing themselves to Amazon and Uber and their bank app. And that's what they expect. And so it's not just, I know we all like to benchmark each other. We're benchmarking the digital experience they're having in their lives. And I know in many areas of Torrens we're working on that because we're woefully behind in certain areas. It should be as easy and on these administrative issues as getting on an app and tapping and being able to get that level of service and support. They expect to gain a network at university and after graduation that's going to help get them support. And so if you really sat in a room for 3 hours and asked your team, how can we be better at networking our students with alumni, better at networking them at our university and using AI to be able to do that, I bet you come up with some great ideas. But that's one of the things they really value. And the last two things, they expect to gain knowledge and skills that will make them employable, right? So how are we doing that to connect with industry? Because at the end of the day, students aren't our product, but when we prepare them, they have to be competitive to be hired. And so how are we preparing them from the real world? And AI, once again, it's not the only way to do that, but how do you plug that in to connect with employers and be able to get real time the skills that they're looking for and the new technology they want our students to learn and bring that into the classroom quickly. As you heard Paul talk about, in 3 or 4 days, he could create a curriculum. And so how do we do that real time with employers so we're giving them the types of graduates they need? And lastly, I'd say, they expect to finish what they started. And I know attrition and progression is a big focus for us. And I can talk about that right after this, but how do you make sure you're using AI to target where you should have your lecturers and your administration spending their time? You can't talk to every student every day, but if you know which ones to talk to about what topic at the right time, that becomes a differentiator, and that's AI can see these patterns.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that's a really useful corrective in a way that not every problem can be solved by AI, or nor should be. There's a risk of every nail being hammered by AI when that's probably not appropriate. But thank you for that. We will come back to some of the issues you've raised, but I want to go to Jess, because you've very recently moved institution, and you were at La Trobe where, as we've heard from Theo, there's been a very strong emphasis on AI first. You're now in day 3 of a new institution. Be interested in your reflections on the extent to which technology strategies and the use of things like AI within an individual institution, whether it's inevitable that the response will be the same everywhere, or whether you think there's scope for each institution to pick and choose a bit the deployment of the technologies. Your thoughts on that?
I might start with the last part of your question. I think every institution will find its strategic sparkle and needs to. Right? We all need to be able to differentiate ourselves through our strategies, and the way that the more we learn about the affordance of AI, how it is transforming our teaching, our research, our assessment, our practice, our operations, we will each then be able to get a sense of how will my university be different from another, as we have done with our education experience, with our employability programs, with our research. So I think that characteristic will come through. But I may be a little bit provocative here. I don't think we are there yet. We are still talking about assurance of learning. We still have students who are using, as you mentioned right at the beginning, they're using AI for their assessment. Great. But how are we making sure that there are checkpoints within their degree program where we can say a real person really did this all by themselves based on what they've learnt with us today? I think that's something we've got to get right. To get that right, you have to have a workforce that understands the affordances of AI, that are capable, that are confident to use AI. I have heard across the sector, not only in my 3 days at Deakin, but in my days at La Trobe and elsewhere across the sector, staff do not feel confident in how to use AI, what tool is available. So the number of questions that come that says, when am I getting Copilot? Can we use ChatGPT? What am I allowed to put in? What can't I? They're really fundamental basics that if you don't get that question right, and if your staff aren't confident, then you're not opening their minds to be able to think about, where can AI take my teaching? Where can AI take my research? Our staff genuinely want to do the right thing, whatever the right thing is. I think there is a really big question that we have to start to solve as a sector around that. And I think once we've done that, we will open our eyes to start to think about the things that Dan was talking about, which is, how do you then harness AI to really start to transform the learner experience? So it's more than just, I'm going to ask ChatGPT or Copilot to help me with my assignment, but actually I am interacting with AI in a way that helps me unpack my learning, understand where I need to go next, think about what tips and strategies or other people I might want to be connecting with that's really going to take us to the next level. We are not there yet. We're having the conversations about it, but deeply in practice and embedded at scale, that's what the sector needs, that's what our students need, and I think that's what the industry will be demanding of us from our graduates pretty soon.
Thank you for raising that. I can sense twitching on my right. I think Pascale wants to say something, and then Andrew. Pascale.
I really appreciated Jess's comment, and I think that one of the dangers that we face as a sector is what I call AI washing, where we're going to look at the way we've done things forever, and then we're going to see how AI helps us do that better. And that's the worst mistake we can. I spent quite a bit of time with some of the staff who were saying, can you imagine how ridiculous it is? The students are going to write their essay with AI, and then we're going to mark it with AI. And I said, question why you're assessing with an essay. What is the learning outcome? Let's go back to fundamentals, and then let's try and think about, now, we have a job with that, and the job we have is, as Andrew pointed out, to convince the accreditation body, because they too function on the basis of nostalgia. So they too think that AI is something that we can just paint over everything, but we continue to have in law a 70% assessment based on an exam because otherwise people are cheating. Except that the lawyers of the future will actually spend 30 seconds doing all the work that they did before in 30 seconds, and then twiddle their thumb for 5.5 minutes thinking, what am I going to charge for? So we really have to we really have to project and avoid what AI can do for education is not what AI can do for the way we've been teaching. It's about what it can do for the way learners will need to learn, and that's a different shift.
Thank you, Pascale. Andrew, you were twitching as well.
I was twitching as well, but for a very similar reason. But this is not the first time we've dealt with this, is it? I mean, my background is not, as I said, not in medicine, but it is in engineering. And yes, I am old enough to remember when we didn't have computers. So at some point you say to people, what do you need to know? And it's not just what you need to know, as in to function in the profession. There's also a professional confidence piece. If my doctor, going back to the medical profession, had to keep taking the book off the shelf and flicking through the book to find out what the solution was, I kind of lose confidence that that's the process unless I built a framing around it for actually that's what I'm expecting to do when I go to the doctor. I'm expecting them not to know the stuff anymore. What I'm expecting them to know is how to solve the particular issue in a way that gives me an outcome that improves the health outcome. So Pascale, I think, is absolutely right. The paradigm has to shift, and the thinking around it has to shift away from how we take a defensive posture for everything to how we embrace what opportunities exist, have the right conversation with the right stakeholders, and then find a way that we can build that community, broadly defined confidence that the professional skills our graduates take out into their careers are going to lead to the sort of expectations being met around what they're trying to achieve, whether it's an accountant, a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer.
Thank you, Andrew. So I think I'm getting the look from Martin, but I think we've got time for me to ask just one final question for your views in response, and that is this really a potential Kodak moment for universities? Is the impact of AI going to be that transformative and disruptive, or is this merely another stage in the incremental evolution of teaching and learning and research in universities? I'll start with Jess and then work along from that end.
I think it should be. I think it should be. It should be a Kodak moment. Like if this isn't, then what is going to get us back to Pascale's earlier point? What is it going to take for the sector to stop those classes where you stand up and dictate to a student because you're the smartest person in the room, and rather get to co-creation and shared understanding? Like, how do we as a sector make it worth a student's time to come to class? And I think AI will help us do that. And if that's the push that we needed as a sector, we've needed to do this for a really long time, but I hope it is.
Yeah, I'll go back to something Paul mentioned. Is there's a bunch of people out there right now figuring out how to disrupt what we're doing. And, regulation has a responsibility, and it will certainly help and protect students and protect the process, but it's not going to hold back this wave, and it's going to come. So I think this is the hardest part, having the discipline to disrupt in your own businesses today and really have a sense of urgency about how you're going to take advantage of this. Paul had mentioned some books. There's a great book, The Medici Effect, around design thinking. And this idea was, which I think about all the time, what's the smallest executable step you can take to try something and test something? And the great thing about AI is you can take small executable steps for almost no cost at all to test new things, because it's digital in nature. And so we just have to be comfortable to get our sense of urgency up and that curiosity we talked about. Do you have someone getting up every single day thinking about how this is going to impact your business and whispering in your ear to have you go try things and test things and make it part of the conversation, make sure it's on meeting agendas? And if you start to do that, the fear goes away and the implementation ramps up. But
I was thinking how I could say yes and no at the same answer, actually. In my view, we tend to think of disruption as the start of a journey, but it's actually not. Right? You go back much further, and universities are or should be good at this. I mean, we imagine what can be, we experiment to find it out, then we have the disruption and the change that comes, then we embed it, and then we use it. So we go on that sort of journey and cycle, and it's a bit iterative and backwards and forwards. I think we know how to not let ourselves be disrupted. What I think we haven't quite learned yet is how to be the disruptor. And that's the piece that we need to do in the sort of the ecosystem. So, I mean, we smashed most of our lecture theatres out of the university when we built the UTS campus 10, 15 years ago. We all have different problems that we have to address, and technology will impact on those problems in a different way for each institution, for each cohort, for each specific mission. But I don't think we should be afraid of being disrupted, and I don't think we should step back from being the disruptor.
So my answer would be that it's definitely, there's a continuity, but there's also an acceleration, and it's exponential in some ways. That's what I talked about, the technology super cycle. But we mustn't forget that the mission remains the same. This is about learning. This is about generation of new. So we can sometimes scare ourselves in thinking this is an entirely new world, and so how do we cope with it? It is the same mission. It's just different instrument and different velocity, I suppose, which is really important. But one of the anecdotes that I like to remind my staff when people get a little bit scared about AI is that the lecture was invented as an effective way of transmitting content at the time where books were not affordable. So now access to very, very large amount of information instantly is affordable. What are we going to do about it?
Fascinating.
Can I just make one other comment to interrupt? Because I was going to try and frame this in the question that you had. Sorry, Martin. I think this is an opportunity for universities to step in broadly. If you think about the democratization of knowledge that we've had over time, where our role as the custodian of knowledge has changed and it's sort of gone out into the world. Now it's being deeply polluted. And I think what's happening is the misinformation, the lack of ability to distill the essence from all this information is here. We created the vehicle to be able to democratize knowledge. How do we actually, as universities, step into solving the problem about how people actually can use it properly. And AI does have a role in that. It enables us, if we can use it effectively, to actually solve what could be one of the most pressing problems of the time, and almost regain the social license that that universities seem to have lost over a period.
Thank you, Andrew. On that note, I will conclude that conversation, but we're going to have some Q&A.
We are. That was a great last question and a great set of answers. If this is a Kodak moment, I encourage everyone to get their shot right now. But I think we had some fantastic answers there, which to me took a great opportunity for leaders in the sector to... Oh, there we go. You can now hear me as well, can't you? Which is even better. To be able to see that I think leadership is accepting of that opportunity and of that change. Going back to Catherine Livingston's challenge that I mentioned at the start of the day of not just admiring our challenges, but embracing them and doing something about it. So great question, great responses. We've had other questions coming in, and Kelly Matthews and Marcia Devlin at the front here are actually reading what they are and are going to relay them to you.
Yes, thanks everyone. A round of applause for our panel. They're not done answering questions yet, though. Now is your time to think about the questions that you might like to ask. Slido is going to appear, and you'll see in Slido that people have been asking questions. In addition, there's a poll up that asks us to pose a question, and that question there is about our graduates. At UQ, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor is very good at saying with AI, it's not about answering the questions, it's now about the questions that you ask. So no pressure, audience, for the questions that you are about to ask. If you have a question in the room, get ready to put your hand up, but I'm going to hand over to Marcia, who's going to start with Slido.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to combine a question from Michael Burgess and a question from Sam Jacob because they're very similar. Given the inevitable disruption you've all spoken about, and given unis are, I'm quoting, notoriously awful at doing anything quickly or simply, not my words, how can higher education respond quickly and effectively to the changes coming? Are new models, new investments, outside assistance necessary?
This can't possibly be a question for my university because we are very agile and we kind of actually do things well ahead of time. So hypothetically, I think it would have to be, it's a culture shift. And so that's what takes time. But provided you have optimism and provided you have a shared vision, I think people can cover an amazing amount of ground in no time at all.
I mean, my answer to it is it's both. There is merit sometimes that universities have to doing things perhaps slower than stakeholders would like, because we're not simply throwing out the value of the things that we've done for a while. So if values are important, in a massive disruption, you could easily shift to the things I think that you were talking about earlier, the things that are important to us get lost if you're not careful to think about how you do it. I have to admit that we are sluggish sometimes. I actually used the word in an all-staff forum. I said it would be great to have got this strategy out 6 months ago, and we've been a bit sluggish about it. We got a better strategy at the end than when we started in. But in saying that, there is definitely an asymmetry in the tempo that stakeholders expect us to work at versus what we can do. So we do have to resolve it, but we don't resolve it by just running faster for everything all the time.
Can I maybe add a piece? And again, maybe a little unpopular in a view. We need to talk, this part isn't unpopular. We need to talk more to our staff to help them to understand the challenges that we face and help them to realise that this is real. So we still have staff asking questions, can I ban AI? What? Like we've come past that, but the fact that staff are still asking that question means it's a real question and we have to continue to have those conversations. Then I think we need to move quicker by being more decisive and having very clear frameworks and clear plans in place for how we will transform at scale. This is not something that you can leave to every academic to just learn for themselves and figure out. It needs very clear change management. It needs very clear processes and frameworks, and you've got to get those sooner rather than later and then drive it hard. So this is all whole of institutional leadership, and I know that's something that we were certainly working on at La Trobe before I left.
Thank you so much, everyone, for that. Dan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't boil the ocean and you can't do nothing. So do something in between. And it's this idea of if you don't have a personal story about how you've been involved or have knowledge of a test or something you've done around AI in your institution, you need to get there. You need to go find someone who knows what they're doing and get some context. This is the hardest thing. It's such a broad and it's such a white paper here of the things we can do with this. We need to start being able to have context at every level of the organization. And so I think it's just scheduling time to make sure you're getting this education, small bits at a time. And it's going to help you have a better point of view. And it's going to teach you, as we mentioned earlier, what questions you should be asking, which is probably the hardest part.
Thanks for that. Have we got any questions in the room? Marcia is going to run to you. While we're waiting for the questions in the room, I love that focus on coming back to thinking about our students customers or not, no matter what, we want them to learn. And they're here, they come to universities to become a better version of themselves, have a more successful future. And that question there about what do we want all of our graduates to be able to answer about AI, I think it's a really kind of a focal point as well when we think about that impact that we wanted to have on learners. I'd love to hear one question you might have. Pascale's like, oh, I don't know, Kelly. Love that. Thank you. Marcia is ready. Any questions in the room?
If there aren't any questions in the room,
John's got a question in the room.
I've got a question. So looking ahead, in let's say 5 years' time, what's the one AI-enabled transformation that you think will be standard in every institution?
Learning agent, so personal tutor basically, but that not just to help you with your learning, but that will actually do intervention and support, so help you to feel more confident in how you can take agency for your learning and also seek support.
Oh, look, I think my ideal world is that nobody's talking about AI. So it's like, it's just what we do, right? It's the same, something else will be out there in 5 years' time. I do, for all the criticisms that are laid at the foot of universities, I think we know how to adapt. As I said, we've got smart people in the room. And I'll give you just one little example as about how to be careful, at least from the university leadership lesson. I wondered whether the fact that we weren't seeing the level of concern or activity meant that we weren't doing anything. But when I asked the question, and we actually had an academic board forum where people came forward, everyone was blown away by what people were doing. Absolutely blown away. Because, as I said earlier, people had lent in. They saw the issues, they saw the opportunity, they saw the risks. They understood that the community needed to come together around the issues. And it's a lesson to us in universities, I think, is that sometimes it's not the sort of downward direction of what one must respond to that's the important piece. It's the fact that we have forever relied on an academic community that does the right thing.
Dan, any thoughts? We do have a question in the room.
Yeah, the one thing I've been thinking about, I've always thought about there's kind of three ways we deal with problems in our lives and professionally and personally. One is intuition, one is experience, and one is education and frameworks methodology. And so I think I'm really excited about being able to give students simulated experience that are going to put them in the shoes of whatever profession they're going into, and getting a lot of runtime in those experiences without even having to go to a company, because we can build these, I'll call them case studies. They're case studies, but they're live interactive case studies where you're getting real feedback, real time. And so by the time you go into on the field, the play, you've been through these scenarios many times. And that's something that's...
Hi. This touches on what Pascale said before about essays being written with AI and marked with AI. We're all obviously focused very much on how we assess at the moment in the light of AI. What do we do to stop ourselves inventing a better slide rule rather than going to the calculator? What does that new assessment look like, not now, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
So we are experimenting in that space, and in our design school we started taking away the assessment piece because we wanted to replicate the experience that people would have in the workplace. If you're an architect and you come up with a project design that's kind of average, nobody's going to say, well, that's a 5 out of 10, now move on to the next project. You're going to be sent back to wherever your studio is and work on it until it's actually going to be acceptable. So we have that approach of saying what is useful is to actually know the calibration of the quality of your work, and that's based on the relativities with the other people in your class and the people who were before and after you. And then you need the feedback, which must be empathetic and constructive, which is you're going to have to work on this again because you're not going to go any further until you fix that. And so it's a very different view. We've observed great mental health benefits from it, much less stress at this kind of all-important time where for some reason we can't seem to organize ourselves and we sort of have all the assessment hitting the students at once. And we have something that is much more preparing of the context, the real context of the professional environment. And you would not believe how difficult that was to get across with the accreditation body. Because you know what the logic is? Well, this was done to me, so it should be done to them. So, this intergenerational teaching abuse we exercise needs to stop. And we are preparing people for the future, and if there's one thing I know, is the future doesn't look like the past. So we just need to change the way we do things.
What a lovely note to bring that section of our conference to a conclusion. That's been a really stimulating session, and clearly there are many questions than we're going to get a chance to answer on stage. We now have a chance for something called coffee, which is a new invention that is being demonstrably shown to further stimulate senses and encourage interaction. So please join us in the conversation quarter for coffee. Be back in here in 25 minutes' time at 11:15, and join me in thanking our panel and John Dewar.